The Rhodoks, masters of their trade, experts in spears and crossbows, and are known for being formidable foes residing in the mountains of Caradia. Now they are ruled by King Gravath and of course with the claimant of Lord Castor of Luca. The Rhodoks were originally part of Swadia but rebelled and founded their own kingdom, and this is reflected in their troop type and of course their geographical location and territory. Let's have a quick overview and then get into the troops. Their strengths are excellent spearmen for beating back cavalry and holding the line, outstanding crossbowmen, and they excel at defending castles and towns. But what about their weaknesses? What problems can they have, and what can you experience while you're playing with Rhodok troops or as a faction themselves? Well, they completely lack cavalry. And this is a little bit of a problem because it means that their maneuverability is very limited since they have none at all. Whereas other factions have cavalry but maybe some are weaker and some are stronger, the Rhodoks just completely lack it whatsoever. Their infantry is very poor at doing offensive attacks. They are very powerful and strong on the defensive, but when it comes to attacking others, they can have a lot more weaknesses than you might think. And of course, like I said, with the lack of cavalry, this means that the maneuverability of all the factions is the slowest. The Rhodoks rely on well-equipped and hardy militias, unlike the levied foot soldiers and heavy armoured knights of their Swadian neighbours though. But let's go into the troop types. What can we expect from the troop tree of the Rhodoks? Well, first off, you'll be recruiting the Tribesmen. These are the basic from Rhodok villages. Unfortunately though, in terms of the other factions in the game, the Rhodok Tribesmen are the worst armed recruit in the game, having only a pitchfork and shield for defense. They're nearly powerless in battle. They are lightly armed and armoured, but they tend to carry shields, which is quite good because it means that they can be defended against missiles, and it sort of gives them a slight advantage against some weaker units in melee, but like I said, they're pretty bad. But because they have pitchforks, they're able to keep some lightly armed bandits at range, and their large shields can protect, of course, like I said, from range attacks. They can actually be recruited from mountain bandits in the first place. Now, once you've got some experience with these tribesmen, they can be upgraded to two things. One of these is the Rhodok Spearmen. These guys wield spears and falchions. These low-ranking soldiers will guard towns alongside trained spearmen, and you'll see them wandering the streets. These will probably be the bulk of your army, at least in low to mid-game of the Rhodok playthrough. Rhodok Spearmen could be the best melee defense against enemy cavalry if you know how to use them properly. They are great with pikes and can be used to be in phalanxes, which of course can stop a cavalry strike in its place. Unfortunately, because of owning these pikes and falchions, they're not quite as good at one-handed melee against other infantry. But about the Rhodok Tribesmen, what was that other option? Well, if you want to go down the skirmisher route, you can get the crossbowmen. Other than the Nord Huntsmen, these are the only ranged units that can be acquired at the second tier. They're outfitted with simple body armor and a piece of cheap headgear. The Rhodok crossbowmen are tier 2 troops that offer the firepower of tier 3 troops, which is quite good, and these guys alongside as Rhodok spearmen should be a big bulk of your army in the mid-game. Unfortunately, they have some drawbacks. They're pretty slow to reload, hence the crossbows, and their stats themselves makes them a bit slow to reload, so it is best to keep them behind a front line of infantry if you possibly can. Now, what about tier 3 for the Rhodoks? Well, first we have the trained spearmen. They have a two-handed pike which makes them excellent against cavalry. They're best used against these mounted units due to the pikes and spears they carry. Compared to the Rhodok Spearmen though, they're only slightly more skilled. They do carry better armor, and unlike the Spearmen, who can only have a chance of getting a shield, these guys are guaranteed a shield. But their lack of short reach weapons mean they're not so strong against infantry. What about the skirmisher side for tier 3? Well, you have the Rhodok trained crossbowmen. These are the third tier range troops for Rhodoks. The only significant difference from the Rhodok crossbowmen though is that they have shields and hoods, which I would think is a completely strange idea to have your tier 3 being only getting slightly better armor. I mean, I would have thought that the Rhodok crossbowmen and the trained crossbowmen have big difference between them, but it's not really. This unit, like the trained spearmen, does have a guarantee though, and this is the shield, which can provide an advantage if they ever need to engage in melee combat. These guys aren't great at melee, so I would definitely recommend still keeping them just behind the line because they can offer some heavy firepower if needed to, but when it comes to actually attacking in melee, they're not the strongest. But saying that, they do have a fairly low cost of keeping, which is great. Now, let's go on to the fourth tier. Well, the Rhodok Veteran Spearmen is something you're really going to be wanting to upgrade your trade Spearmen to. They're the veteran infantry of the Rhodoks, and although this is a strange side thing, they're actually coded to always spawn with a board shield, but they never actually use them, and you can't actually see them. The board shields are actually invisible, and they're never really seen on the back. The The primary purpose of the veteran spearmen is to keep enemies away from your missile troops, and they are armed with a variety of polearms optimized for anti-cavalry work. Their main disadvantage is their lack of one-handed weaponry, leaving them vulnerable against other infantry. Now, they host a noticeably larger amount of hit points than other infantry of the same rank to compensate for the ability to use a shield. So, because they don't have a shield, they're not going to have great defense, but because of this, they're able to have more health, so they can take more hits, which does compensate a little bit, but of course I would still find a shield to be a lot more powerful in my opinion. Although the veteran spearmen are great for being able to set up a phalanx. But what about the veteran crossbowmen? What are these guys? Well, these guys are extremely well trained in the art of the crossbowman. They've been outfitted with padded cloth armor, so they still have pretty weak armor, but in terms of their skill and their attack with the crossbow, they are deadly. They are so skilled with the crossbow, but obviously not quite as much as the next tier, which we'll go on to a little bit later. But saying this, they can still take out higher infantry or even cavalry out of the fight in one shot, meaning that unless you are watching out, these guys can be a real threat to you. If you're using them, make sure you use them to your advantage, firing at higher class units at the enemy, because they will be able to take them out if they get a good shot in there. Unfortunately, they do have the drawback of not having proper head protection, which is a little bit of a problem when they're being fired at back. They can take one hit to the head and they will go down instantly. But we're getting on to the higher tier of the Rhodoks here. This is where the Rhodoks really start to shine, and what makes them famed across Calradia for having extremely strong troops. Doesn't matter if it's in the melee field or the skirmishes, these Rhodok top tier units are extremely powerful and are a force to be reckoned with. The Rhodok Sergeant is a top tier unit for the melee line. These guys are among the best infantry in the game, alongside the Nord Hussars, Swadian Sergeants, Vaegir Guards, and Saranid Guards. Although, I think it's safe to say out of all the infantry in the game, apart from maybe the Nord Hussars, I would put the Rhodok Sergeants at the top. They're quite effective on the field, and especially for siege defense. We do know that the Rhodoks are very powerful when it comes to defending, maybe a bit less in attacking, but defending is their forte. So when you put them in the siege defense, these guys are almost unstoppable, especially at the top of the ladder when people are trying to get up, and these guys are able to stab down with the spears and then change into their one-handed weapons. Unfortunately though, talking about one-handed weapons, they do have a worse one-handed skill than any other elite infantry, making them less effective in that respect. They have large board shields and polearms, which are perfect for repelling enemy units from the walls of your castles or even your towns. But what if the enemy breaks through this defensive line? Well, past the swinging polearms, sergeants will engage in close combat with shorter weapons. You can see in the gameplay that when the enemies get pretty close, they put away their spears and they get out some close weapons. This can be a wide array of different weapons that will absolutely hack down the enemies with their strong, powerful swings. The one-handed weapons that they are typically equipped with are a mix of cleavers and hammers, making them fairly effective against most targets on foot. Although you do need to watch out for, because some of them, like I said, will have hammers, and these hammers are classed as blunt weapons. But if you switch to blunt weapons purposely, not all of them have them. Some of them have cleavers which aren't classed as blunt weapons, so if you click the button where it makes everyone switch to blunt weapons, half your force will have their fists out. So that's something to watch out for, because you don't want to be going charging into the battle with just your fist. That can have some bad connotations to it. But finally, what is the top tier skirmish unit for the Rhodoks? Well, this is the Roadog Sharpshooter. These guys have highly polished skills and the strongest crossbow wielding troop in the game. Now, I did do a Swadian troop tree overview the other week, and everyone said how the Swadian crossbowmen would just get absolutely owned by the Rhodok crossbowmen if they went to a head-and-head battle, and I think it shows in the gameplay footage and their stats. They're armed with fearsome siege crossbows and steel bolt combinations, which can take down an enemy with any armor in 1 or 2 hits. They will also carry a board shield, and this equipment setup allows for some very powerful strategies. The best strategy to use with the Rhodoks is Spearmen and the Sharpshooters together. A line of Rhodok sergeants in the front holding a shield wall, or maybe even a phalanx. Then you have your Sharpshooters behind them, able to fire from extremely big ranges at the enemies, taking so many down, but eventually if they get through the crossbow barrages, then they're being faced with these sergeants. Now, the Sharpshooters, while being great crossbowmen, are great in also self-defense, so it's not even that necessary to have a ton of Rhodok sergeants. In fact, their skills in melee are on par with veteran infantry of other kingdoms, which is incredible. That's the 4th tier of other kingdoms, and the Sharpshooters are on par with them in melee, which means that they're able to hold their own when it comes to fighting hand-to-hand combat no matter what. Their Iron Flesh and Power Strike are impressively high, meaning they can deal a lot of damage and they can take a lot of damage as well. But that is the overview of the Rhodok factions. Which is your favourite troop in the Rhodoks? I mean, it's probably going to be the Sharpshooters, because the Sharpshooters are absolutely amazing. And comparing them to the other factions, the Rhodoks are extremely powerful when it comes to infantry. Yes, they might not have the cavalry, but they have everything to counter that. They have the crossbows to counter enemy infantry and skirmishers, and even sometimes cavalry, because they overshoot their horses. And the Spearmen can also, of course, counter other infantry and definitely the cavalry, but even the other skirmishers because of their massive board shields. The Rhodok seem to be an all-round menace to the rest of the factions of Calradia, and I think they're extremely powerful, and I am enjoying, actually, I'm doing a few playthroughs of my own stuff, and I'm enjoying using them to do that. But thank you so much for watching. If you want to see another faction, make sure you leave a comment down below on what faction you want to see next. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, follow me on Twitter if you haven't already, and until then, I will see you in the next one.